Hello, my name is Martin Gibson. This is a series of meditations on the Essential Trigon, three contemplations and a communion on the nature of life. The current state of human affairs appears to some of us to be stuck in a dialectic characterized as a struggle between good and evil. Others of us might think of it as between intelligence and ignorance. Still others between fun and fear. How does one deal with the phenomena of risk and opportunity in the forms and processes necessarily faced in life? Once observed, it helps to first identify, then to recognize correctly which is which, or if both, how much of each one is facing. Which tools do you use to make a determination? Do you trust your gut or your heart or your head first when facing a problem? Are you conservative or liberal in the choice you make in regard to either? Being conservative toward risk makes sense, but what about being liberal toward opportunity? Isn't being conservative toward opportunity as wrongly fraught as being liberal towards risk if one is unwisely gambling away one's fortune? Most phenomena in life are a mix of both, so learning to gauge the mix is important. For traditional or rule of thumb advice, do you put your faith primarily in religion or science? Realize that the question is not faith or science, since even science relies on faith in the validation of certain axioms for its operational integrity. What are those axioms of science? Are they necessarily different from the axioms of religious faith, or is this a misguided and misunderstood distinction? At some point, for the experience of life to be authentic, each of us must look for direct confirmation of the axioms of both, not just to the traditions or fashions of one or the other in the community. The developed intuition and logic of the individual soul's heart and mind must be added to the instinctive observational capacity to recognize purpose in material nature, if we are to fully realize the intentional capacity of spiritual nature that drives the cosmos and all life in it. These are some of the questions we will try to frame through these meditations on the Essential Trigon. Such meditations are part of an ever-present, ongoing phenomenology of life, a study of the forms and processes that appear to our senses in the interactive field of experience as living souls, however you understand that soul to be initially, prior to verification of its essential capacity and nature as perpetual by each of our very own souls. In life, souls appear by nature from birth to be diverse members of a distinct community of similar souls of inherently special kind and quality, where special can be understood as any manner of biologically diverse species enmeshed in the phenomena of life. In a manner recognized in common with friends and family in the community, such phenomena can appear as perpetual or constant, episodic, happening once or at random, or intermittent, that is repetitive, all focused in an evolving process of interacting forms. A primary objective of such study, both natural and schooled, is to distinguish between the risk and opportunity in an inherent mix of both. This is best done by differentiating the aspects of phenomena into what appear to be essential capacities as transcendental or always present within or outside of space and time, and what appear to be existential natures occurring finitely only in space and time. Yet in this differentiation, we might well expect to find that all existential phenomena have a potential to exist as expressions of the essential capacities, according to their mix of derived natures, once they are sufficiently understood. Souls in a like-kind community tend to distinguish between phenomena that are recognized by agreement as being of a nature that is external to the souls as materially objective phenomena, and phenomena that is commonly agreed to be internal to the souls as mental forms and processes, subjective phenomena of an ideal nature. Ideal not in the sense of excellent or perfect, but rather as constituting mental forms and processes. Forms observed as objective and material phenomena appear to resist attempts to alter their positions in space and time, exhibiting in varying degree an inertial capacity to stay in place or to resist or delay impulses to change those positions or states when subjected to stress-inducing processes which are intended to effect a change in those inertial states. Forms and processes not commonly observable and therefore deemed to be of an ideal subjective nature may still appear to any subjected soul to have an internal, that is, an inertial capacity, a ponderous presence resistant to intentional manipulation, either within or outside the mind of that soul, as with objects in a dreamscape, or an image of a feared risk or desired opportunity that the soul cannot or does not seem to want to shake. Though generally nuanced as being immaterial thoughts, in a manner that suggests to the community that such subjective forms and processes are entirely ephemeral, such forms can have weight. Even though they may be perceived as within that mind and capable of being easily manipulated, as with the hands of a sculptor in creating forms from modeling clay that can be readily reworked when a new inspiration arises, such thought forms can be energetically, mentally charged with inertial intent, carrying risk or opportunity, or a mix of both, for the beleaguered soul who has yet to develop an understanding of the mental skills necessary for recognizing or appropriately dealing with such forms. Though perhaps not so much the case in most living species that are more tightly tuned to their environment, the human soul operates on a rather narrow spectrum of instinctive understanding of both the intentional and the inertial capacities of living required for dealing with day-to-day risk and opportunity. The formal capacity of the human mind to manipulate ideal natural forms and processes, to intentionally create them as if from entirely novel cloth or by clever adaptation of formerly held stock, exhibits a much broader and deeper bandwidth for augmentation and for degradation in employing logic and intuition in the mind of the developing soul than the instinctive genetic programming. It also facilitates access into the minds of young and immature souls for the propagation of mental forms and processes of a less than ideal nature from sources of nefarious effect, if not intent. This is very much the opportunity and risk that humanity now faces on a global level. Despite all the current hullabaloo about AI and the phobias over whether complex mechanical material processes might overtake human beings as conscious forms of life in an evolutionary process, living requires the application of an evolutionary capacity, an intentional capacity, to change inertial states or motion within the ideal nature. In order to find, acquire, and bring food to the mouth, for the soul to energize its function in the community and its supporting environment, this takes more than oxygen required for breathing. The spiritus breath is a necessity for energizing the intentional capacity of the soul. It is not the soul nor any material capacity that provides that intention. Rather, it is the spiritual nature of life, which is global in scope. The spiritual nature may be understood biologically and existentially, theologically and transcendentally, or both immanently, the latter of which is a must as my choice. In my way of looking at the world, these four equally essential capacities are irreducible. The inertial capacity of objective material nature to hold purposeful place over time, responsive to the intentional capacity of subjective spiritual nature to initiate purposeful change in that material nature, facilitated by the formal capacity of an efficient and effective ideal nature, through the living, imaging capacity of the intersubjective, interactive soul natures as mediating agency for that intentional change and inertial feedback, incorporating these three global capacities on a localized, discrete, reproducible basis in the innate, logical, and intuitive intelligence of the human soul, thereby transmitting intent, both immediate and remotely programmed, and providing material feedback in the establishment of dynamic balance within the field of experience. These four irreducible interactive capacities are the basis for the presentation of the meditations on the Essential Trigon. This perception of life from a transcendental phenomenological perspective acknowledges the soul's ever-present capacity to love life and is necessarily contemplative, not to the exclusion of an integrated activity, but with pervasive purpose. It allows one to question every form or process of life without trepidation or prejudice, because it understands that everything one encounters is grounded in the willful capacity to live that love. In the process of living authentically, one learns to distinguish various truths from the forms and processes we encounter, chief of which is discriminating between what aspects of these phenomena appear to be true only for a while here and now as existential truths, and what aspects appear to be true in perpetuity as essential truths. This must be done in order to learn to navigate with clarity the risks and opportunities of living for the benefit of one and all, with a judicious approach that is conservative in mitigating fear and ignorance and liberal toward enhancing love and wisdom in the community. We will break this unified view of the essential trigon, outlined here in the introduction as four essential capacities, each of which is observable, recognizable, and communable in the forms and processes of four essential existential natures, into four extended separate components as three meditational contemplations and one communion. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a basis of understanding these four essentials that are by no means new to public discussion, but are offered in a novel framework suitable for addressing the nature of some of the existential concerns of the time in which we find ourselves. Thank you. To recapitulate, as part of our material nature, we observe forms and processes in the field of our operational perception, including those in our minds, by focusing on a thing of interest, in this case, the essential trigon. As part of our ideal nature, we recognize in material forms and processes the possible risk of pain and opportunity for pleasure that might come from our interaction with them. In this case, what effort might be rewarded or wasted by studying the essential trigon. As part of spiritual nature, we commune with the forms or processes to understand the essential truth about detrimental risk and beneficial opportunity, about the pain or pleasure presented to us in interacting with it. as with this study of the essential trigon. And finally, through our soul nature, we focus our attention, a continual process of observation, recognition, and communion, on these natures, navigating from our individual vantage point within the community, separating the kernels of essential truth from the chaff of existential circumstance, as here in this Essential Trigon video. In the following slides, our primary attention will be on the area inside the frame to the right. It symbolizes the multidimensional field of focused interactive experience, in which the presence of existential forms and processes, incorporating a variety of qualitative natures, can be understood as the operation of essential and essentially formless capacities, by virtue of the intentionality recognized as functioning in that living field. To the left above, we will find from time to time supportive information for the frame of reference at right. So, what do we see? What do we recognize? What do we commune with in this slide? The answer is nothing, as in no thing, not a thing. What we do see is a blank slate with a potential to show any number of things as we are able to imagine and project them into this frame of reference. Note that this metaphorical frame of reference is always present, whether we are focused on it or not. Here, out of no thing, we have something. But what is it? Is it a recognizable thing based on our experience or understanding? What does it present to our minds? That mind is working behind the scenes, projecting images onto the screen, trying to find a recognizable image to fit over, under, or into the one within the frame. Perhaps it's a map of a bay or a peninsula, an outline of two cliffs separated by a ravine as a chasm, a graph of the global economy over the past 23 years. All ideas and guesses, but no sense of recognition. Just an ambiguity of form struggling to represent some deeper, invisible informational content as the mind flips back and forth from left to right and top to bottom, trying to focus some idea in the mind with the existential image against the essential material background. What might we add to give us more clarity? An alligator peering up at us at the edge of a backyard pool? When given sufficient time, we begin to get a better picture of what is happening in the background. And we begin to get some clarity for everyone, except perhaps for the guy behind the glasses. So, who is the imp seen here? Perhaps an ergotted soul. You might ask, what is ergotted? Not ergodic, as in the concept of ergodicity, its thermodynamic cousin, but ergotted, as in ergod idiocy. As souls, we are gods, prone to err, ones that can be idiotic from time to time. But we'll have to save the development of that idea for another presentation. Returning to our empty frame and the observed appearance of no thing, we start our investigation of the essential trigon with the focused observation of a simple material object as it appears within the frame, in necessary contrast with the background of no thing. There are generally dozens, if not hundreds and thousands, of things in our field of perception at any point in time, but we intentionally are designed to limit our focus to material pursuits by recognizing things of valued risk or opportunity or curiosity. If our vision is decent, here we observe a figure recognized as three connected lines. Based on the experience of most adults and school-aged children, through a subconscious process that goes largely unnoticed, we instinctively compare the object against our subjective database of learned objects and recognize it as a specific representation of a polygonal form defined by three sides and points, generally named a triangle. With continued reflection, in a self-conscious process using the capacity to recall the specific name of the object, we now understand it as an intentionally defined form, an equilateral triangle. The act of recognizing in the material object a representation of the ideal form having equal angles and sides constitutes an instance of communion of the observer with the observed form, but also a communion with the intentional purpose of the triangle and any spiritually useful nature it might have. Our entire experience of life can be symbolically represented by this form, which I'm calling the Essential Trigon. We're calling it a trigon to emphasize the nature of the area within the triangle, which represents the living nature of the field of existential experience. We connect with the field by way of three unseen boundaries, essential capacities of life, in the formulary mix of inertial density and intentional power to create all existing forms and processes through a fourth essential active capacity of nature. The triagonal area is our experience field of life, but the thing that defines that existence is the boundary to perception, which, while continuous, is well defined by three sides of nested forms within forms and processes within processes. While there is no human experience beyond the three lines, as seen in this frame of reference, that does not mean that the same three potential and one active capacities are not operable outside or within the living field of the trigon. As we shall see, this opens up as we carry the notion into the next dimension as the essential tetrahedron. The first boundary to human experience is our intentional capacity, provided in our natal ability to seek succor at birth and to register the response of others to that cry for help. Starting with a newborn's first breath and cry for attention, and a desire for a mother's breast of warmth and milk, we are sustained from minute to minute by that breath. In Latin spiritus, that breath is not just poetic symbolism. It is a motivating capacity to create, sustain, enhance, and replicate life. The expansive motivation for living drives the desire for sustainable form in all material existence. This inherent motivation to seek help, recognized as such in other humans and inferred in much of the rest of nature, can be attributed to the essential spiritual nature of that intentional capacity to find a way to satisfy basic needs, and for those with a matured capacity, to provide that succor for others, especially the young, to create and to offer or withhold the means for that satisfaction as appropriate. The second boundary to human experience is our inertial capacity. Learned rapidly in time with intentionality, it is recognized through the inability to provide or achieve immediate satisfaction from interaction with other people and things in our environment. We come to recognize material nature as this inertial capacity that can prevent a timely response and satisfaction of our desires due to factors outside the reach of our intention. With experience, it becomes apparent that an intentional capacity, perceived as a desire for access to sustained forms for a specific purpose, requires the inertial capacity to sustain such forms over time in material nature. The same purposeful desire requires both intentional and inertial capacity in order to utilize these forms. Such use is facilitated by the unintended inertia of repetitive processes in creating and maintaining a variety of existential material natural forms, sometimes with unintended effects. Thus, the inertial capacity of material nature provides a second and equally necessary boundary constraint on the field of living experience. The diurnal cycle of time gives a rhythm to life as a reflection of the minute ordered oscillations of elementary particles that at first glance appear to be the random, unintended result of a mindless cosmos. It is nothing of that sort. The third boundary to human experience is our formal capacity, the inherent capacity to form ways and means to satisfy our needs and wants. We come to recognize the ability to reach that satisfaction through the nature of thinking, of forming thoughts about things in forms and processes based on an instinctive yet intentionally motivated aim, as a means of navigating our way through the risks and opportunities of life toward an ideal satisfaction of our goals. This final necessary boundary constraint on the field of experience, represented in the Essential Trigon, includes the formal capacity to recognize in any and all material forms and processes an essential spiritual intent based on the nature of ideal forms and processes. Natural in this context means inherent and innate. Ideal in this context for forms and processes indicates a capacity to incorporate representative forms and processes for intended results as found and recognized materially and mentally in nature. These forms start with geometric and mathematically defined constraints on dynamic life processes. In the field of observational and interactive experience, humans recognize their own imaging capacity in nature, in themselves and in the multitude of like-kind forms and processes with an ability to replicate. The replication capacity with similar experience in ideal, material, and with reproduction, the spiritual nature of life, gives an understanding of the soul or ensouling nature of life forms that operate in the field of experience between the essential boundary capacities and natures. The imaging capacity of the extended field of experience is the living capacity of life to replicate itself through these three capacities of the trigon boundary as souls in situ within the field of space and time, whether that imaging is at or prior to birth of the individual or group as its soul nature. It is born with certain instinctive capacities according to its genetic position in space and time, along with a similarly positioned capacity for reasoned navigation of the field ecology and intuitive interaction with other similar souls. The whole experience of life is comprised of these four equally essential principles, as principles spelt with an A, of consciousness. The essential trigon can be described as the ideal of all ideal forms and processes, as the essence of living, the undifferentiated potential of becoming all that is, was, and will be. while at the same time being in actual embodiment in everything that exists. In terms of major religious traditions of the world, such essence is indistinguishable from Brahman, the monistic whole of Advaita Vedanta of Hinduism. It is the source of the triune gods, Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer of worlds, along with their divine consorts and celestial retinues. Or the tetragrammaton of the Abrahamic religions, that infinite, boundless source of life, love, and light that is beyond all naming. Again, the source of all that ever was, is now, and ever will be. It is the source of the Elohim, the divine gods and goddesses, and their angelic kingdoms. We started this introduction with an idea of how we come to recognize four natures, starting from birth, as aspects of the world we live in. From a basic understanding of these existential natures, we can derive four related capacities, three as timeless potentials, and one actively self-replicating here and now, incorporating the other three as axioms of continuity in the changing appearance and quality of life. These principles function at any scale, in human beings and in all forms of sentient and non-sentient existence. These four capacities articulate in a multitude of natural forms and processes, interweaving in a dynamic tapestry of harmonically diverse nature. The first natal capacity, rising from the hunger of birth, is the notion of intentional change, realized along a spectrum from unmet desire to actualization. So we have the intentional capacity of the spiritual nature to produce all spiritual, material, ideal, and soul forms and processes of life. Next, the frustration of intent from encountering things that we cannot change or move gives us a notion of intractable inertia. And so we develop an understanding of the inertial capacity of the material nature to create and hold forms and processes observable to the senses, created by the intentional capacity for the purpose of such appearance. Human beings tend to rely on the sense of sight as the primary mode of appearance in defining their place in the cosmos, but the primal mode is touch, as bodily, emotional, and mental immediacy through continuity of form and process. With continued living, we learn to differentiate pleasant and hurtful things and recognize a hierarchy of patterns within patterns. We learn to differentiate in our minds between what are essentials and what are existential forms and processes as expressions of those essentials. And so we come to appreciate by degrees the formal capacity of the ideal nature to give coherent, recognizable mental form and process as specific representations of ideal forms and processes created by the intentional capacity for the purpose of an evolving experience of quality and qualities of life. Finally, with fortunate circumstance and ability, through persistent and discipline and effort, we come to understand we are an integral, inseparable part of the process as the living capacity of the soul nature to observe, recognize, and commune with all forms and processes through the imaging of the first three in the fourth nature as a reverence for life, appreciation of such appearance, and fulfillment of that quality. The four essential capacities, with their related existential natures as introduced above, are parsed in the rest of these meditations on the Essential Trigon as three contemplations and one communion. Contemplation 1 extends the graphical framework for this meditation in greater detail as a statement of life understood by our perspective on the natures of these essential principles. It elaborates the next level of flesh on the logical bones of the trigon and completes the framework with the interconnecting nerve and sinew. Onto this motive background, the operational scope of this meditational exercise with the notion of a point of dynamic balance is presented in the remainder of this and the following 3 meditations. Contemplation 2 focuses on the appearance of physical phenomena within the essential trigon backdrop as a scientific domain for investigating the inertial capacity of material nature. It does this in part applying dimensional analysis in modeling the emergence of matter and energy from the trigonal field of experience, using the classical deterministic mathematical logic of torsional wave mechanics and simple harmonic motion as focal points of dynamic balance and systemic equilibrium. This to show that stochastic systems of inertial and intentional behavior are rational, necessarily bound by the deterministic foundations of such quantum emergence. Contemplation 3 investigates the concepts of Plato's Republic against the essential trigonal framework by re-elaborating Plato's scheme of the linear devolution of the ideal notion of the good of justice under the guardianship of a philosopher king through a system of increasing decay. Here, Plato's concept is shown as a ring of 4 extremes of the state, moved from the central position of the republic of the guardianship of a philosopher king, which is understood as a point of balance in community organization. Talking points from analysis of global and U.S. economic statistical factors as witnessed over my lifetime are also included. Communion of my experience over this time period, as outlined in the above 3 contemplations, counsels an attitude that is liberal in fostering love, wisdom, and opportunity for all, and conservative in guarding against the propagation of fear, ignorance, and risk within the community. Such communion will be dealt with anecdotally, perhaps as an opportunity of developing the principles of the essential trigon in a public forum. An alternative trigon might be understanding the truth of such a communion with my high school and lifelong friend J.C. and our fellow travelers from a couple of weeks on the Greek island of Paros in the summer of 1972. Here's one such from a cover of the book recounting those days as planned and reimagined as occurring in 1971, while being written in 1973. It was subsequently elaborated in 2021 with personal reflections and formalized in ideal fashion as the essential trigon there, before finding its way into the content of this PowerPoint presentation in 2023. The first section and part of the book, the Paris Commune of 1971, is the Remembering Happily part, written in 1973 after returning from Europe, with a preface written in 2022 prior to publishing. The second part, which is also the start of the second section, 2021 and beyond, was written at various times over the past 2 decades while reflecting on my spiritual adventures of the first several years after leaving Paros, leading up to my return to North Carolina in 1976, after building a cabin in Washington State to house myself while writing the great American novel. It never happened as life intervened. After my wife read the original manuscript from 1973 and thought it a good read, the first with the second part were combined for publication in the spring of 2022 as the Paris Commune of 1971, subtitled Imagings of Soul and Community. The ISB numbers are shown here. All are available online and by order through your local bookstore. But as I realized I wasn't done writing, I added a third part attached to the section 2021 and beyond as the Essential Trigon in 4 chapters, as meditational exercises, which is the backbone content of this video presentation, consisting of Contemplation 1, Life as Essential Principles, Contemplation 2, Appearance of Physical Phenomena, Contemplation 3, The Quality of Political Economy, and Communion, Love, Wisdom, and Community. With this third part, the final tome became the Paris Commune of 1971 to 2021 and beyond. Here shown with the appropriate ISB numbers, all in hardback, paperback, and EPUB form. However, since things were not confusing enough at this point in my literary journey, I decided that there might be 1 or 2 people that were interested in the spirituality and philosophy without the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I repurposed the writing of the second section, parts 2 and 3, though I'm sure at my age that I can't understand why anyone would want to contemplate anything without a view of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, perhaps in the rearview mirror. This repurposed material can be found as the Paris Commune 2021 and beyond, with the appropriate ISBN numbers in paperback and EPUB form. Buy the book. You'll like it in one form or another. Linked references in the second section of the chapters on Contemplation 2 and 3 are to monographs related to modeling a physical theory, 7 of those, and investigative political economy, 3. These have been compiled together this year under a separate title as Unification in Physics and Political Economy, subtitled by an introduction, The Aim and Goal of All Modeling, Clarity in Navigating Risk and Opportunity. These are offered in paperback and hardback version. The print versions are available through local bookstores and online, but the EPUB version is not available as of this time. With this reference made, we move on to the presentation of the Essential Trigon after one final introductory slide that has meaning to me. We started this presentation with a contemplation of an equilateral triangle, but the significance comes from recognizing the potential for detail that might emerge from meditating on the mix of these 3 boundary constraints, as can be found within the field itself, within the triangle. Hence a name with greater specificity here as the really essential trigon. If colored red, similar to here, I know the authenticity of this particular form well, from many faithful communions with a Bass ale bottle. Finally, we have some contact information if anyone is interested. Much of what is provided in the slide presentation can be found online in various forms at the website uniservant.org. Peace and love.